Welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burris, and our topic today is a prosecutor's view on criminal justice. Our guest is Commonwealth Attorney Joe Patano, and we want to welcome. Thank you for coming out today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's get started by first telling our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I was born in a small town in western New York and raised there, Penfield, New York. I went to college in Rhode Island, went to Providence College, graduated there in 1994 with a BA in political science. I knew I wanted to study law, but I wanted to do something before that, so I was accepted into Washington and Lee University School of Law in Lexington, Virginia, but I deferred my acceptance for a year to volunteer, and I volunteered through the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. And I went and taught physical education and coached at an inner city school in Houston, Texas, and really enjoyed that experience and loved working with the students. I think I took far more from them and learned far more from them than I gave to them, but it was a great experience. And I sort of got bit with the social justice bug and became very interested in figuring out a way to give back to whatever community I was going to end up in. So went to Lexington, went to law school at Washington and Lee. Didn't know what type of law I wanted to practice, but my second year got involved in a clinical program where we were assisting attorneys that were representing individuals that were on death row charged with capital murder. And I participated in that program my second and third year of law school and just fell in love with criminal law, specifically criminal defense work. When I graduated, I took a job in Richmond, Virginia at the Virginia Resource Center, which was an office that helped defend and represent inmates on death row with their appeals. So again, I stayed with death penalty defense work, but it was all appellate work, which is, you're sitting at a desk and doing legal research and writing. You're not in a courtroom trying cases. They had already been convicted and sentenced to death. And I found through my first year of doing appellate work that I wanted to be in a courtroom. I thought I could make more of a difference by actually trying cases and getting involved on the front end. So in 1999, the Charlottesville-Albemarle community was opening a public defender's office. Jim Hingley was opening an office, and I saw that there was an opening, and so I applied and was fortunate enough to be one of the original attorneys hired in this community at the public defender's office, and came to Charlottesville not really knowing anything about it. I didn't go to UVA undergrad or UVA law, but I came here because Jim Hingley was opening a public defender's office. And I was an assistant public defender for about 5 years, and I loved it and fell in love with this community and felt like I did really good work representing indigent folks that had been charged with crime. But over the years, I felt sort of ineffective in that I saw the power that prosecutors had, and the exercise of discretion by prosecutors really affected the outcome of cases much more than representation by defense attorneys. And I never wanted to be a prosecutor. I didn't have that as something that I thought would interest me or I'd be good at. But I saw some local prosecutors and the job that they did in the city and sort of their ethics and their professionalism and how they cared about treating people charged with crime fairly. And I said, I might be interested in doing that. And so they had an opening after I'd been a public defender for about 5 years, and I applied. And I went and interviewed with Dave Chapman, who's the current Commonwealth's attorney. And Dave looked at me at my interview and he said, "What are you doing here?" Because I think I was sort of known as a public defender that wanted to sort of fight for the rights of those charged with crime. And I said, "Dave, I see the way that people in this office do their job, and it interests me, and I think I could do a lot of good for the community and victims, but also for defendants." And so that was a little over 13 years ago that I was hired as an assistant Commonwealth's attorney in the city. And I've been doing it ever since, and I just absolutely love it. I really enjoy the work. I think you can make a big impact on the community and help people and their families, and also help those charged with crime. So that's sort of my story of where I ended up, where I'm at today.
Okay, you wear many hats also. But let me ask you this. It was interesting how you got there to the prosecutor's office. What do you think you bring with you to that position based on your experiences?
Well, one of the things, I teach a clinical program at the law school, at UVA Law School, and it's third-year law students that want to prosecute. It's the prosecution clinic. I co-teach it with another individual. And one of the things that I ask the students to think about, those that want to prosecute, is I ask them to think about maybe doing a little bit of defense work before they prosecute, or being exposed to that in some way. And what I think I bring to the job is something that I think is necessary that all prosecutors have, which is humility. I think that you need to approach the job that you do and the discretion and the power that you possess with humility. The people that we prosecute, for the most part, are not bad people. They're people that have made bad choices. And I try and remember that with every case I have, that you don't know more than anyone, or you don't have the right answers. You have to go into every case with an open mind and humility and try and do the best you can. And there's human beings on the other side of the courtroom, and I think you can never forget that. That's an important thing to me that I try and bring to every case.
Okay. Like I referred to that you are president-elect of the Charlottesville Albemarle Bar Association also. What does this job do, and why are you participating in this? You're probably pretty busy as a prosecutor. So what are you giving or taking from a position like that with this organization?
Well, CABA, or the Charlottesville Albemarle Bar Association, is comprised of almost 500 local attorneys, civil and criminal. We have a monthly lunch with speakers. There's different activities that the bar does. There's some social events. They're reaching out to some of the schools, and they have a Now You're 18 program where they're speaking. There's a Liberty Bell Award that they give out. I became interested in serving on CABA because it does give you the opportunity to meet your colleagues in the community and to reach out to the community. One thing I'm interested in exploring next year, I start June 1st is when my presidency starts. There's something called the Firms in Service Committee, and that's local law firms that want to give back to the community through pro bono work, or they provide free legal services to folks that couldn't otherwise afford it. And I think there's a lot going on in our country and in our community where lawyers can be very impactful in donating their time and their skills to help those who might not have the resources to have legal representation when they need it. So I'm interested in sort of having that be more robustly involved with the community.
How does this fit in with the public defense or legal services?
It doesn't really fit into the criminal aspect of it. It's more civil, but lawyers can help folks. For example, Legal Aid is involved in a lawsuit with a large local firm trying to challenge the DMV license suspension scheme for fines and costs. So there's a lot of work that you can do in the community. There's been a lot of recent litigation that's been covered nationally with some of the current policies on entry into this country from certain places, and those folks needed lawyers, and so there was a lot of pro bono work being done by the legal community to provide representation to folks that couldn't otherwise afford it. So,
well, one thing I noticed about this meeting and the organization is there's a lack of people of color, African Americans specifically, black folks. So do you have any, I'll give you some suggestions maybe, and then I'll ask you the question. I think one way to get African Americans or black folks interested is start having, you're talking about these law firms, maybe establishing some internships within those firms that people can come in for a summer and work in a law firm to get to know what is law, about the essentials of law, and what they can do in that field, and the impact they can have on somebody's life through being an attorney. So I was just wondering, did you have anything in mind reaching out to the community that it doesn't necessarily reach out to bring people in?
Yeah, it's a problem, and we need to do a much better job. And I believe last year or the year before, the CABA started a diversity committee to try and look at that issue and figure out what we can do to have broader representation. I would say that being involved over at the law school, there are a lot of outreach efforts by firms and recruitment efforts by firms. A lot of them are in big cities where folks want to go, and so we sometimes lose out to that. But I am very interested in continuing to try and improve the outreach and scholarships and mentoring opportunities because it's something that, you do look around that room and there is a lack of diversity.
Okay.
And it's gender diversity too. The last several bar presidents have been white males, and I think there's a whole bunch of areas of diversity that we need to be aware of and focus on.
Okay, I hope you would pick up the diversity committee, because as I see it, it's been dead on arrival because of lack of participation from the major firms around here. But let's go on. What are some of your other goals for next year when you take over? Because it's only a 1-year term, right? So you got to do a lot in 1 year.
It is. And what someone advised me that had been a president before is they said, you do have that 1 year, and instead of trying to do 4 different things in a mediocre way, try and pick one thing and do it well. And so I'm going to try and keep my focus narrow. And to me, I'm very interested to hear what you had to say about some of the lack of diversity and initiatives we can explore for that. But to me, getting the Firms and Service Committee up and running, I've already talked to the person chairing that. That's an important thing to me, that we need to get lawyers hooked up with opportunities to donate their time in a pro bono manner. So I think that'll be sort of the biggest thing I'm interested in pursuing.
So let's talk about your job as a Commonwealth attorney. What are the best part of your job and some of the worst parts?
So the best part of my job is when a case is over and a person has, oftentimes a case concludes with a judge imposing a sentence in a criminal matter. To me, the best part of the job is when I can look over at a victim that's there in court for the sentencing, and they can look at me and say, thank you for what you did. We appreciate you giving us a voice in this process. But the other part that I really enjoy, that along with that, if the defendant can also look over, they have a chance to address the judge before the judge imposes sentence. If at the same time the defendant can look at the prosecutor and say, I also want to thank you for the way that you treated me with fairness and respect, that to me is the sweet spot. That's the win-win, when you vindicate the interests of a victim of a crime, but a defendant also feels that they were given a consequence for their choices, but they were treated in a fair manner, and that to me is the best part of my job.
Okay, let's take a step back. Maybe some of our audience or viewers are familiar with the Commonwealth attorney and what their jobs are. Could you just give us a kind of an overview or summary of what the job of a Commonwealth attorney is and how it's implemented?
Sure. So one of the important things is each community, whether it's a city or a county, each community has their own Commonwealth Attorney's Office. So Albemarle has their own, Louisa has their own, Charlottesville has our own. So I am a member of the Charlottesville Commonwealth Attorney's Office. So we prosecute all crimes that occur in the city of Charlottesville. We don't do anything beyond that.
All crimes, you mean criminal crimes?
Right. All criminal acts that occur in the city of Charlottesville, when people are charged, we will prosecute those offenses, but it's just in the city of Charlottesville. We're also involved with working with the Charlottesville Police Department, the University of Virginia Police Department, when they're investigating crimes. And so we also advise detectives and police officers that are investigating crimes that have not yet been charged. So there's a very close working relationship with the police departments. We also talk to victims of crime. They can call in and say, I've been a victim, or I've had my car stolen, or my house was broken into. We'll work with them and talk to them and get them linked up with the appropriate resources. So it's not just going to court prosecuting folks, it's also you're involved in investigation and victim outreach and victim contact. And then we help with policies. For example, the department recently was looking at body-worn cameras, and so lawyers from our office were involved with helping them draft the policy for how body-worn cameras were going to be utilized in this community. So you wear many hats in the job.
Okay. Now, what I'm wondering is, and I've wondered about this for some time, is how do the Commonwealth Prosecutor's Office enhance the lives of people living in the community?
Well, to me, and this really goes to why I'm running for Commonwealth's Attorney. Dave Chapman's retiring after 24 years, and I'm running to replace him. To me, it enhances the community in 2 ways. It keeps the community safe, which is what we all want. We all want to live and work and send our kids to school in a safe community. So that's one thing that's very important that we do, is we keep the community safe. But the other piece of work that we do that's very important to me is that we're responsible for treating those charged with a crime fairly. again, we go back to this prosecutorial discretion, and you really can affect the lives of people and their loved ones in a significant way. And so to me, our job is to keep the community safe, but hold in our other hand at the exact same time, treating those charged with the crime fairly. And you have a lot of ability to impact the community in that way, both for good and bad.
Okay. So if I'm a citizen and I feel that there's been some type of criminal act against me, what are the steps do I take?
Well, first of all, if it's an emergency situation, immediately call 911 and the police will respond. If it's a non-emergency situation, you call the Charlottesville Police Department, and I believe their number is 434-970-3280. I believe that's the non-emergency number. And then what will happen is the police department will send out an officer or a detective, and they'll take a report. They'll interview you, they'll collect evidence, they'll document everything, and then they'll come to the prosecutor's office and we'll decide if there's evidence to charge someone, or we can develop a suspect, or what other tasks need to be done. So we try and be responsive to victims of crime. And then our office also has a victim witness component where we can reach out and provide services to victims of crime, counseling, financial, just information about the case. So there's a variety of services that are available to folks who've been the victims of a crime.
Okay, so then when police give you this case, then you have the discretion of whether pursuing it or not pursuing it.
Correct. And we also have the discretion of advising what charges we think are appropriate. Sometimes the police charge before they talk to us, but we can always file more serious charges. We can reduce the charges. Again, it goes to the idea of the discretion vested in a prosecutor is tremendous. And so you can figure out where you want a case to go. And again, if you consider all the circumstances of the case, that's what leads you to decide how to prosecute it. And, it takes a bit of experience to figure out how to do that. I'm better at it now than I was when I started 13 years ago.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you're running for Commonwealth Attorney. Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
So you're now the person that's in charge. And one of the questions keep coming up is that our jail is full of people who are put there because of a small amount of marijuana. As you said before, the prosecutor has the discretion of whether or not to prosecute these folks because of the amount of marijuana or not prosecute. And take into consideration that all around the United States, marijuana is being legalized, either for recreational or medical. What is your stance on this?
Well, I'd be curious. I'd be curious as to your source of information that our jail is full of people charged with marijuana offenses, because I don't think that's accurate. Mm-hmm. Locally, in the Charlottesville Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and I have to be careful that I just speak about our office, if you're charged with a misdemeanor amount of marijuana, you don't receive an active jail sentence. There may be an outlier that I'm missing, but it usually results in a fine if you're convicted. And usually people ask for pre-conviction probation where they comply with some terms and conditions and it's dismissed. If I'm elected, I would take even the possibility of jail off the table for small amounts of marijuana. I don't think anyone should be in jail for a small amount of marijuana, although I don't think anyone is in our local jail now for a small amount of marijuana. It's less than 2% of the cases. It's not a priority for the office or the police department. So that's, I think there's a misperception that the jail's full of people for marijuana offenses, because that's just not
Let's talk
true.
about the pipeline of young black males from the community or school to jail. Could you kind of talk on that type of situation that we see every day, that some of our young people are just, don't have the opportunity of getting education because of the jail time that they've had?
Yeah, so I think the first step in that conversation is acknowledging that it's a problem and not trying to say, oh, it's, I don't want to talk about it or I don't want to think about it. I think that you have to first acknowledge that it is an issue. There's been some studies done locally that our office has been supportive of and participated in, the DMC studies, disproportionate minority contact. We're unsure why there is disproportionate minority contact in the way I read the study about the juvenile system. Once they do hit the criminal justice system, I think the study showed that they're treated the same black folks and white folks are treated the same once they hit the system in the juvenile study. But to me, I think you need to look at every single case and say, who are we sending to jail or prison and why? And what is their background and what are the mitigating factors that might be present in their life? Did they have a single parent home? Are they struggling with employment? Are they struggling with poverty? And I think what I've tried to do as a prosecutor over the last 13 years is try and interrupt that pipeline and try and interrupt that cycle and that flow. When I was a public defender locally, the reason I was interested in prosecuting in the city is because I saw people in that office trying to interrupt that flow and that pipeline as best they could. And it's sort of a case-by-case basis where you try and make sure that if a person has to have a consequence of jail because of what they did, you can talk about a blended sentence of work release and home incarceration where they don't go to the Department of Corrections. You can keep them local in the jail and have them doing sort of the work release program where there's money being set aside that'll be there for them when they get out and help pay their court costs down. But I acknowledge it's an issue, and I think you just have to do the best you can to try and address it and be aware of it and not be dropping these tremendous long prison sentences on people without being thoughtful about it.
Okay, now you have two tools. Your office has two tools, drug court and crisis intervention. Tell us about those and how you will be using them in your administration.
So again, going to your question of how do you interrupt this flow of people going from school or a young age to jail and prison, the pipeline as you referred to it, how do you interrupt that? Well, there's a couple ways you can interrupt it, and you have to be intentional about it and have it be a goal, and I would like to be intentional about it and do have it as a goal. So CIT is something that we brought to the community a little over 10 years ago, I believe, and we were one of the first jurisdictions in Virginia to have it. It stands for Crisis Intervention Team Training. And the logic behind it is it started in Memphis, Tennessee. The logic behind it is if you have a person that is suffering from a mental illness and they have an interaction with law enforcement, they could look scary, they could look violent, they could look like they're going to hurt someone, but really they're just acting out the symptoms of their mental illness. So the logic of a CIT trained officer responding is that they're trained to recognize and diffuse a situation where they're dealing with a person suffering from mental illness, not that they're violent. And so they're specially trained in de-escalation and in using their words and in recognizing what might be going on. And the goal is to try and not have them be arrested. It's to try and say, let's not let them hit jail. Let's try and get them to a facility where they can meet with a clinician or have a temporary detaining order placed on them until they can get their medications adjusted. So that's one very important thing, is keeping folks that are interacting with law enforcement out of the criminal justice system on the front end. Because once they hit the jail, we have another set of problems that we have to deal with. So that's CIT, Crisis Intervention Training, and we have those officers specially dispatched to scenes where there might be an individual suffering from mental illness. Same thing with those suffering from drug addiction. We don't want to lock up and incarcerate and spend scarce community resources on jailing addicts. We don't want to do that. So the drug treatment court that we've had, which is about to celebrate its 20-year anniversary, is identifying those that are charged with drug offenses that are addicts, and we want to give them treatment, not incarceration. So the drug treatment court identifies addicts, and it has them presented with an opportunity where the charge could be dismissed if they complete 12 to 18 months of drug court treatment and have sobriety and get a job and pay their court costs. And I'm extremely supportive of the drug treatment court and supportive of diverting addicts from the criminal justice system into treatment. And a lot of the people in drug court are referred there by their arresting officer. The police officers are calling our office and saying, I think this person needs help. I want them to get help.
Okay, so you control, or how do you control the training of the policemen? Is that what is the connection there?
Well, the crisis intervention training is done by an outside agency that we don't participate in that.
But you tell the police officers they should be taking it?
Yes, that's done through the police department. I don't work for the police department.
Right.
They don't work for me. It's two separate bodies, but they have officers that volunteer to get that training, and they have a pin on their uniform, and it's a pin that says CIT, so they're a specially trained officer, and the pin indicates that. And then as far as training of police officers on other issues like the Fourth Amendment search and seizure or the Fifth Amendment or the Sixth Amendment, we participate in roll call trainings. A lot of times they'll come over to our office and ask questions, so there's a lot of informal training. I'd like to see some increased training at roll calls where we've got lawyers present, where there's a bunch of patrol officers present at the start of their shift, where we give them updates on the case law and tell them what we'd like to see as far as best practices when they're interacting with citizens.
Okay, so we're winding down now, coming to the end of the program. So I'm going to ask you this question. Why should it matter to our community who their Commonwealth attorney is?
Well, that's a great question, and it's extremely important to folks who their Commonwealth's attorney is. And it goes back to the two things I mentioned earlier. You want someone that is the Commonwealth's attorney in your community that is going to keep the community safe. You want someone that's going to do that can work with police and victims and keep the community safe. But again, you also want someone who, in my opinion, needs to have the humility to understand that treating people charged with crime fairly is just as important. And you need someone that can do both things, because you don't know when you're going to be caught up in the criminal justice system. I don't know when I'm going to be, or one of your friends or family members or loved ones. And you want someone that is sort of captaining that ship that you can trust is going to exercise their discretion and the power that they have fairly and even-handedly, and that they're going to treat people charged with crime fairly, but they're going to also make sure that they keep the community safe. And I feel very passionately that you need someone that's got experience and integrity, that understands the importance of doing both at the same time. And I think that's why it matters to people, and it's also why I'm seeking the office.
Okay, so we got to wrap it up. We've got 2 minutes left. Just give us a summary of what you feel that we should leave with the audience.
Well, again, thank you for having me. I really enjoy these discussions. And as I've been campaigning, I've been out knocking on doors, talking to people and listening. And I guess to wrap it up, what I've learned is it's a really amazing opportunity to have to be able to serve the community in this capacity. And it's a very important and humbling opportunity to have. And I think that to wrap it up, Charlottesville is a special place. My children go to Burnley Moran Elementary School, and I'm going to raise my family here. And my wife is a psychotherapist and has a local practice here. And we love this community, and we've been here for almost 20 years, and we're very invested in it. And I think sort of keeping it a special place, while it has problems that we need to address, it's just something that I'm really interested in sort of keeping at the forefront of why I'm doing this. It's sort of about community in Charlottesville, and that's sort of the takeaway I'd ask everyone to leave with.
Okay, like that, but let's keep it a special place for everybody.
Everybody. Everybody.
There's some people who are better off than others, and some people that get the end of the stick, you might say. So we have to look at those who are least able to look after themselves and give them a helping hand. I want to thank you for coming, and do you want to give us your email address again or your website again so people can contact you if they have some additional questions?
Sure. Website is joeplatania.com, just my name, joeplatania.com. And thanks again for having me.
Okay. Remember, this is the Neighborhood Law Center. You can see us on neighborhoodlawcenter.com, or you can see us on, as you know, Channel 13 on Mondays at 10 p.m. That's the Neighborhood Law Center. If you can't get us either on the website or the TV, you could always go to YouTube and type in Neighborhood Law Center. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. This is Melvin Burris, your host. Our theme has been A Prosecutor's View on Criminal Justice.